Good morning, everyone. Welcome. As you can see, we're going to be recording this morning because not all the people that wanted to be here could get on. So we're recording this for their availability. And I would start out by saying, welcome to a conversation about applied biotensegrity and biomechanics, featuring Paul Thornley, advanced neuromuscular therapist, medical exercise specialist and STOT Pilates instructor, and student of all things fascia for decades, who resides currently in Dubai. Paul is well known for his educational video collaboration with the Reverend Dr. Joanne Avison, a fascia scholar and author of several books on yoga and fascia and movement. Myofascia Magic is one of her books. We welcome Joanne here with us today as well. My name is Carol Davis. I'm a physical therapist and your moderator for today, and we will be in conversation for an hour, and it will be recorded, as I said before, for later viewing. My role as moderator is to offer some structure to our process. We encourage conversation and open discussion about our thoughts and beliefs about this science. In order to bring order to this, we welcome your part of the conversation. We're going to ask you to use the raised hand function down at the bottom of your screen over on the left. This will cue you up in order so that we can take your questions or comments as they come up. I would ask you to keep your comments and points as brief as possible so as many people as possible can be heard today. I've been invited to offer my views about applied biotensegrity at the start. I see myself as a student of this science. I've been studying it rather formally for over 10 years. And while I still feel that I don't have a full grasp of the concepts that are integral to this science, but I have studied it enough to conceptualize how the main points of applying biotensegrity as I view it spring off of my foundation that I learned in school way long time ago of biomechanics. Central to my belief, and this is my belief only, is the fact that living systems are not machines and that we set our lens to view what's happening in living systems incorrectly if we view it through a mechanical framework and use the language of mechanics and machines and parts. The story of Copernicus comes to mind, who recognized that there was something wrong with a geocentric view of the universe. It wasn't accurate. And a couple hundred years later, Galileo, by studying the moons of Jupiter, recognized that Copernicus was right. The sun is at the center of our solar system, not the Earth. This was a huge paradigm shift in the way our lenses are set in how we view the solar system and our place in it. The sun seems to be rising every morning and setting every night to us here on Earth, but in fact, the sun remains still and the Earth is what moves. And when we know that, we can take that knowledge and apply it to weather systems, maps, navigations on Earth and in the skies. So if my patient comes to me with a knee problem, for example, and I use the principles of biomechanics and arthrokinematics, I can help my patient regain function by focusing on that joint and its related structures, improving the quality of the hinge fulcrum. But when I trade that view, that limited view of that part, and expand it to what I understand about applying biotensegrity to the knee and to the human who has this knee problem. This knee is composed of a 4-bar closed kinematic chain, united holistically with and energetically with similar 4-bar closed kinematic chains of the pelvis and of the other knee and of the shoulders. And all of a sudden, my manual therapy and movement therapy reflects the honoring of a whole person as a complex, organized system rather than a machine made up of parts. So, in conclusion, I hold with those who hypothesize that applied biotensegrity in human systems can be understood as a force field arising at conception when egg and sperm unite. This, in my opinion, energetic field of the sum of continuous tension with intermittent compression shapes all physiological flows throughout life, from activity within cellular nuclei through the fascial network to the surrounding biofield, driving movement, blood, lymph, neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, steroids, hormones, thoughts, and driving communication across micro to macro scales. Some may prefer a model grounded solely in Newtonian physics at the molecular level. However, I hypothesize that such a view is incomplete without acknowledging the subtler energetic dynamics, the movement of electrons and photons and protons that applied biotensegrity offers. This perspective, applying biotensegrity in this way, for me, offers a unifying framework for studying and understanding living systems as complex, self-organized fields rather than merely linear mechanical structures. That works so much better for me and for my patients when I move and think and apply from that model than from the model that I was educated with in my master's program in physical therapy at Case Western Reserve. And I appreciate being able to have a foundation to work in spiral diagonal planes rather than linear planes that I learned for movement in school. I'll stop here. You've heard enough about me. Now I just yield to the conversation. And I welcome Paul, if you would like to comment or start, and we'll take off from there.
Well, firstly, thanks very much for inviting me to this conversation. And I'm only a participant amongst all of you enthusiastic practitioners out there. It came from a great webinar that Diana and Dr. Kevin created, and it was quite lively. And my role was to share my perspective of how I would inform and interpret how a rider would become symbiotic with a horse and how we might train riders differently and in a more appropriate way in the 21st century. And as somebody who has specialized in trying to identify why somebody ends up in chronic pain, my main aim and my main passion is try to understand how to avoid people getting in these predicaments in the first place. And where I wear my badge of my education, and we're all biased to where we learn our trade, I learned with the clinical anatomist John Sharkey in Dublin in the National Training Centre. And although, yes, we were certainly introduced to the map of biomechanics, but the fundamental difference is it's a language of convenience and a map of the territory, but it doesn't map the actual landscape beneath the skin. And that's where we were always introduced immediately on from day one, is we are fascia. And if we are fascia and we are not just this musculoskeletal puppet, how does this fascia manifest itself and develop from embryonic beginnings and what does it bring to life? And what brings to life is these invisible forces that we know govern our ability to exist at all on a planet that thrives within a solar system and continues to exist in the universe. And that is tensegrity. Understanding these coexisting, co-creating forces of compression and tension is essential to making sure that as a human race, we continue to thrive, not continue to try to survive in our day-to-day lives. So my role is to look at people individually, enjoy the opportunity that each one of those presents, watch if the tensegral arrangement of themselves is being animated appropriately, and make relevant changes and influence this living architecture properly in such a way that it lets them thrive in whatever environment they want to go and enjoy their daily lives and activities within. So I just offer my opinion based on the experience I've gained from working with the likes of Carol and John, and particularly Dr. John Avison, who I've created this program with, which was born out of our experiences in the lab with John. I've done over 10 years now, dissections with John Sharkey under his guidance, and whether it's preserved in a formaldehyde, which is quite a dry process, or teal, which is more oily, or if it is one of a fresh frozen, each of these variations gives a different opportunity to explore the human form after death. But what that gives us is a window into the history of how somebody used their body and the ramifications of how they used it. And one thing I have never found inside anybody is a part or a piece. I've never found a muscle that I didn't create and had to sacrifice something to reveal something. And it's really important that we see the reality of humanity rather than get bogged down in the convenience of a language that we've been bound to and bound to conform to for so long.
Okay, thank you, John. Or Paul, sorry. I was thinking about John Sharkey and our common experiences with that master teacher. So now let's open it up to your questions and your comments. So remember, if you would put your technology on mute, your Zoom on mute, until you're called forward to offer your questions or comments. And who would like to start off the conversation with Paul and all of us? Yes, Dr. Hassler.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I guess the first thing, Paul, and Carol too, would like to know what your definition, what causes pain in this framework that you're proposing? What's the source of pain?
Paul, would you like to respond to that?
Well, that's a great question, Dr. Hauser. What is the cause of pain? If only we had the golden chalice to pull the right answer out. What we understand is that the sensory receptors in the body, in the human form, reside within fascia. We now know and understand this to be so. Mechanoreceptors live in muscular proteins, and they're stimulated to make muscle move and muscle force, and other factors and characteristics emerge. However, what's come to light is that your sensory system, your primary system, is in the variation of textures within the fascia, which is within the collagen liquid crystal matrix. And that's where your sensory system resides. And as it informs you of the insult that may or may not have been accumulated or acutely received, it then transmits it throughout the body. Is that an adequate answer for you?
Yeah, I guess the question I have is most of the time we talk about, I'll just say nerve conduction, we talk about sodium transport mechanisms. And so to me, I understand the chemical part. I'm just not understanding the tensegrity part, other than the mechanical reception. And if that's the case, then to me, that seems pretty mechanical. But it seems like Carol and yourself are arguing more of a chemical or I would argue also a fluid dynamic component too.
I would agree with the fluid dynamic element 100% because we are a liquid crystal matrix of bound water surrounded cellular tissue. And what that means is we are contained like this bottle of water, and everything inside it cannot escape. For anything inside this bottle to escape it, we must rupture or damage its environmental boundary. But everything inside it must be rhythmically harmonized to coexist and ensure that everything works efficiently. Now, how that works is like an orchestra, and the conductor, which is your nervous system, must recognize that everything is harmonized to and organized, and it's self-organized so it can self-regulate, so it can then perform over your lifetime. Now, unfortunately, what we tend to do is we overwhelm variations and certain elements within the wholeness that we are, and that puts undue pressure and creates an irregular fluid dynamic pressure through force transmission. So instead of it being efficiently transmitted throughout the body, then certain parts of your body reveal themselves as the victim to the pattern of movement that's been established. And over time, that victim will try, because it's all about its ability to 100% continually try to adapt so you can continue to move and perform and react, whether that's physically, emotionally, or spiritually. There's always a reaction to life and life's influences. However, if they become unrhythmic and they get interrupted, then you play out of tune. And you can continue to do that for so long until you hit that threshold of negativity where the body can't adapt and tolerate it any further. And now you create inhibition and you create certain systems where they start to defend you. So quite the contrary, you're now not thriving, you're now in survival mode. So now you're now creating a very irregular neurological stimulus, which creates a very poor and dysfunctional chemical response to move this myofascial living architecture. But there is no machinery inside. There cannot be a mechanical movement inside a living organism. The fundamental difference between the two is one is mechanical and one is an organism. And in mechanics, which is based on hard matter physics, that's the explanation of things that don't change shape. They change configuration to perform. In an organism, which is soft matter physics, we're designed to change shape every moment of our existence while we're alive. And even during death, we contort and change shape until we freeze and we create rigor mortis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But that's all managed and harmonized through the rich primary sensory system, which resides within your fascial liquid matrix.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. If you would, yes, good. Alyssa.
Well, now instead of asking my question, I want to respond to that. So
Okay.
Before I do that, I should probably say my name is Alyssa. I studied equine somatics and somatic education. So rather than at the Novato Institute with Eleanor Criswell, Hannah is where my background and introduction into the concept of tensegrity and working with living bodies came from. And so my work and experience is with living bodies mostly, not with dissections, not with studying anatomy, although I do that because I'm very interested in it and with the neurophysiology of why what I do with the living animals and people has an effect and how does that work and where is it coming from and how can we understand how we're influencing living organisms and then talk about it, which I think is the harder part. It's easier to do it either with our own body or with a client or a student than it is to explain what we're doing or in some ways teach someone else to do it, other than like the how of doing this stuff seems to me a lot easier than explaining what's going on the inside. And I think that acknowledging that we don't totally understand what's going on the inside as the science and the knowledge is evolving is really important for me as I do this and with my students and in any of these conversations, because I think every time we have a meeting, there's going to be, or a discussion like this, there'll be something new that someone discovered or a new paper that came out that's going to maybe change how we talk about this as we learn more. And I feel like we're, as much as we've all collected knowledge and studied here, I think we're probably still quite early in the stage of understanding this, the body and the fascia and the concepts of how this all works.
Your points are well taken. Did you have a question, Alyssa?
Well, I wanted to respond to Dr. Hausler asking what is pain, because I feel like we didn't, yes, go ahead, get like a concrete answer, which I don't know that there always is one, but for me, using the oversimplified language maybe that comes out of the old paradigm of biomechanics, or the paradigm or the style of talking about it that I originally started learning anatomy and would cause me to say that pain is information at its most simple, right? It's information that's coming in through the sensory system from some way or another, as Paul was talking about, all the sensory receptors in the body. But it's not just the information, it's also the interpretation of the information. So I don't think it can be just one thing, and it's different for every individual, right? So we can talk about the actual sensory input or response to sensory experiences that create that input in the body. And then we can talk about how it travels through the body. And to do that, we have to talk about the structure of the nervous system and of the different tissues in the body to be able to understand that. But then once that information gets to the central nervous system, it gets processed, which is a word I don't totally love because it doesn't really mean the same thing to everybody. But and I find with my body and with my work that sometimes the pain, or sometimes that information is interpreted as pain and sometimes it's not, or people have different ideas of what that is. And we have that pain scale of 1 to 10, which is great for human assessment, but we can't use that with animals. So anyway, there's a spectrum, but I think there's a lot of opportunities to talk about it, either as sensory information, but then also as the interpretation or the actual experience of it that can vary, which is probably what makes it so hard to talk about it or solve it or give an answer out of that golden chalice, right? Because it doesn't really exist and it's different for everyone. And for my work with animals, they can't tell us. Yeah, Paul.
No, I think you're right. I think you're doing brilliant, Elisa. Brilliant explanation, because it is a spectrum, and one person's pain is another person's pleasure. And it very much depends, like you say, on why they're experiencing the discomfort or the pleasure, whether you interpret it to be functionally necessary or a limitation or creating some sense of inhibition in the future. And I think we have to take each case on its merit and understand why somebody is feeling whatever it is they're feeling. But it is a sense of emotion. Whichever one it is an emotional response to something happening in or around them, or something going through them.
Well, if I didn't work with animals, I might be able to agree with that. But since the animal can't describe their emotional state, yet we can still observe pain in them, I don't know that we could say that with
Could they say what?
certainty.
If somebody's in pain, animal or human, they'll let you know they're in pain without doing it verbally. And that's what we were discussing there, that there's a spectrum, whether it's painful or there's a pleasure or somewhere between the two. And we'll always be informed, generally non-verbally. There's always a way of people expressing their discomfort or pleasure, depending on, like, for instance, you go to any gym facility and people are in excruciating discomfort, but they're all smiling because of it. If you go onto any rugby pitch, the guys punch themselves in the chest and it's quite violent, but they enjoy it. It's like a sense of endearment. But you do that to a woman and she'll kill you. It's how it's interpreted and why we're interfering with it in the first place, because not all discomfort is of a negative nature. Some pain is necessary. It's a stimulus. So I think we have to be very careful how we define it. I think it's more important that we understand the arena it's occurring and how it might have manifested itself to be to require interpreting.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to say now. This is a conversation about biomechanics versus applied biotensegrity. And it seems to me that we've gotten into, by looking at the concept of pain, we've gotten into looking at neurophysiology, which is part of human science, and to some extent interoception because of the emotional aspect of it. And surely animals are different than humans. But what would you say about the underlying framework within which pain is conceptualized? Because when we're talking about biomechanics versus applied biotensegrity, we're talking about a framework, the way our lenses are set to view human function or living system function or horse function or animal function. And the pain exists within that system. And biomechanics would have a different point of view about, I mean, everybody's heard Melzack and Wall and the very linear description of coming into the sensory receptors, going up to the thalamus, being interpreted in the brain and so forth, and the orchestral concept of the brain. But how do biotensegrity and biomechanics apply here? Alyssa, are you comfortable dealing with that level of your comment and your question?
Well, I think that there's maybe two other aspects if we're going to follow the pain track to get back to the biotensegrity biomechanics conversation that we should bring in, and that's that there's a functional aspect which leads us to the ability to non-verbally communicate or observe pain in a body, right? Or at least we would assume, or our interpretation from the outside is if there's a dysfunction in the body that there is probably pain associated with it. But if you ask the person, sometimes there isn't, because their interpretation of what they're feeling of the restriction or the whatever it is not necessarily what we're seeing from the outside. And there's often a lack of awareness in the individual about the pain. They're used to it, they like it, they have an interpretation of what they're feeling, which is something that I have not seen explained in biomechanics, because I think the shallow end of the biomechanics pool, I don't know how to say this, but the area where it doesn't cover enough for me is in the variability of the individual to change themselves and change their shape and their pressures and their tension, like Paul was talking about, and like we have an awareness of from the tensegrity or biotensegrity lens, more than I think in the biomechanics model.
Thank you, Alyssa. Paul, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment like this. If we're looking from a biomechanical perspective, as most allopathics are doing, you get your client in if they're pain or they're experiencing discomfort, and they do it from a very stationary position, from a very linear aspect, or they're lying on the table, and it's very passive, and the attention tends to be drawn to the area of pain, like it's a part that needs replacing or addressing. From a living tensegral perspective, I want to know why are they moving inefficiently? I want to know the movement that they're doing that is creating this discomfort for some reason. And then I'm looking for efficiency of movement, not symmetrical of shape. Because like trees, and particularly a bonsai tree is a good one, when you see it, it has grown and formed itself in these delicious spiraling configurations. If we were to look at that tree and go, but it's not straight, you would have to break it and force it to go vertical. Mm-hmm. Well, we are of the same configuration. We are formed through a spiraling configuration of embryonic growth, known as invagination. Our body invaginates and folds within itself to create the amazing variety that's on screen today. And yet biomechanics would have us believe that everything should be stacked and organized and symmetrically positioned So that's the most efficient place for a human to be. And if it's not, then it must be dysfunctional and it must be corrected and it must be altered to achieve a pain-free status. Well, that's clearly not. So I would argue that if you can understand that everything moves everything, it's how it's influencing everything from a starting point. And that might be somebody just trying to get up out of bed. That might be somebody trying to sit in a chair and have to move from the chair. It might be something more athletic or more demanding. But it's always an emotional response to the environment they're in and the activity that's expected of them to perform that results in this pain scenario establishing and manifesting itself.
Thank you,
How's that,
Paul.
Carol?
That's good. Alyssa, we're going to move on now to Sandra. Is that okay? If you would put your hand function down, great. Sandra, you're up. If you'd unmute yourself.
First. Hello,
There you go.
everyone.
Good
Yes,
morning.
I'm Sandy. My background is 38 years of practice as not just a human chiropractor and sports chiropractor and all of that other stuff, but also with animals, both small animals and horses. And I just have my question has more to do with sacred geometry and the golden ratio and how you, whoever wants to answer, maybe Joanne, maybe you, Carol, maybe you, Paul, on how, I've heard the word spiral. Carol, you mentioned spiral. Paul, you mentioned spiral. And of course, the golden ratio and the spiral of sacred geometry actually blends beautifully with all of this, but I was very interested in your perspective on that.
All right,
Well,
Joanne has her hand up, but Paul, do you want to start off?
No, I think it's the appropriate time to introduce the very Reverend Dr. John Avison, who has written a book on this very topic. So off you go, young lady. Strap yourselves in, lads. This could be a long one.
You crack me up, Paul. No, it won't be.
I couldn't help myself.
Thanks. I love that, Sandra, and thank you for inviting me. I didn't come to speak as such, but I just want to clarify a couple of things, and that is the human body, the animal body, the animal, vegetable, mineral body, any living architecture has at its source the patterns of sacred geometry, period, full stop, end of discussion. Because to me, it's all nature. Now, when we wanted to study the human body about 400 years ago, a tiny little smattering of history, because that's where Carol started, in order to get permission to dissect human bodies, to study human anatomy, because up until that time, as I understand it, Barbary apes were used. René Descartes went to the Pope, and you'll be able to read this in Candace Pert's book, Molecules of Emotion, which Sandra, you put in the chat. Her opening introduction, absolutely, she had me at the intro, it was just brilliant. And René Descartes did what she called a turf deal with the Pope to get permission to dissect human bodies. And that deal was this: you can dissect human bodies in the physical, which will be allocated to science, but all the metaphysical aspects, the being, the spirit, the soul, if you will, the mind, the emotions, will all be under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church. For the sanctity of the soul, and I'm making no comment about religion. I've been told not to talk about religion, but I'm not religious myself. I know I have the title Reverend. It's a hard-earned title in spiritual science. The Roman Catholic Church, in order to govern, needed to have power over. So these ideas were segregated into managing the populace through, I don't know what you want to call it, God politics, I guess, whether you went to heaven, hell, or purgatory. And all of that was kept under the cultural meme of the time, which was a superpower. If the Pope didn't agree, you didn't do it. And René Descartes was familiar with Galileo, who was under house arrest for daring to uphold Copernicus' theory. And as such, from that time, the human body was dissected on the basis that it was segregatable from its being that animated it. And the idea was that the form could be analyzed, and in Candace Pert's words, broken down into its component parts, where overarching theories were extrapolated about how that moves. And the birth of biomechanics through, I won't say directly, but let's just as an overview, we've only got a certain amount of time. Borelli dissected, as I understood it, a dog's leg, and of course then had an open 2-bar chain because it was open at both ends. And the definition of a lever, which is the foundation of biomechanics, is an open 2-bar chain with a pin joint that moves in one plane. Well, I've never come across a living human or a living horse that moves anything in one plane, has any pin joints in it anywhere, and there are definitely no open 2-bar chains. So by classical definition, as daughter of a very brilliant mechanical engineer, I struggled with that biomechanical definition of motion from the get-go. My heart actually breaks when we talk about mechanoreceptors in the fascia, because for me, they're sensory receptors. And that also is a language that precludes us from evolving the biomechanics. I'm not making biomechanics wrong. I am saying we have to expand to include a much bigger picture for living creatures, be they animal, vegetable, or mineral. The common denominator of animal, vegetable, and mineral, to my view and studies, whatever they are, is that they abide by certain laws of geometry. And that includes 5 Platonic volumes that are regular polyhedrons, i.e. a limited number, a finite number, 5 being the number of life, so living things, and an infinite number, the equal and opposite, an infinite number of irregular polyhedrons. And if any of you have had the time and opportunity to see Jean-Claude Gamberto's work, you will see that when he takes an endoscope under the skin, we see like innumerable irregular polyhedrons as the foundation of the living architecture. It is geometric because it's in the round. Everything's in the round. Every tube is rounded, every pocket, every pouch is rounded, surrounded by the skin of that part of that organism. So from the organelle to the cell to the organ to the organism, everything's round and surrounded and grounded because we're on planet Earth. So we are the system in which force is transmitted from the ground as ground reaction force through the body. So I am afraid I disagree with something you said earlier on, Carol. You know, we have some nice discussions, let's say, but I don't believe that tensegrity is continuous tension and intermittent compression, and nor do I believe applied biotensegrity means anything. As far as I am concerned, tensegrity is the foundational principle of how force is transmitted through not just living things. A ball, a round thing, is a tensegral architecture because something inside and something outside are in a co-creative force transmission system, which is what we are. And what we're discussing is how force is transmitted through form and how forms respond to that force transmission in self-organizing living creatures. And I think anyone studying the nervous system and the neurology and the neurophysiology and the neuroscience, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I can't learn enough. Same with the chemistry. I happen to be working with somebody at the moment on a new paper. She's just done a paper, Dr. Karen Kirkness, absolutely exquisite work about the pre-neural infiltration of minerals through the fascial matrix and the mesenchyme in the embryo that actually allow the neural network to do what it does. What I think gets tricky for us all is that we've inherited these centuries of wisdom that we honor and respect, because for some of us it's a step to move on from. Other things, it's let's go right back to the ancient sacred geometry and look at those patterns because they tell us so much. And it's this, how do we weave all of this together appropriately and not get stuck in the idea that a lever can explain a living being? It can't. It's a totally inadequate metaphor. It doesn't work. It fails on every count if you just start with the definition. And I also believe that tensegrity can't be applied because it's revealed as the foundational shape and form and force transmission of every round thing. Every cell in this body starts as a round thing. And we're made of tissues, round cells, and the in-between. And those cells shapeshift. And every shapeshift has a consequence. And as everyone has said here, that information passes through the system. When we don't like it, we might call it pain. But there's a lot of pain science that's saying that we don't actually have nociceptive cells as such, but now it's being discovered in the fascia, there are nociceptive cells and there are fasciacytes. And so we're discovering all this new territory. And every time we discover these new distinctions, it calls us to expand and redefine the others. But that's difficult because, as Alyssa said, we've got to have some pattern to start with. We've got to have something that makes sense to us. And I've never met a horse that's come up to me and said, oh, I'm a bit upset, my knee hurts. You know, and I've had a dog that was definitely upset and sat and cried in my arms. I didn't know dogs could cry. And then I start reading about the science of tears, that tears of sadness have a completely different physiology and chemistry to tears of laughter, for example. Who knew? So where I come back to in this is that, and Annie, you've written, sacred geometry is a belief system and a symbolic framework that contains geometric shapes, proportions, and patterns that reflect the fundamental structure of reality. These forms are thought to express underlying principles that connect nature, mathematics, consciousness, and the cosmos. I love it. I don't think it's a belief system. I think it's the maths, physics, and chemistry of consciousness. So I merged that. And let me just say the tensegrity icosahedron is the one shape that represents a round thing. It's the one shape that won't tessellate. So what that means is that it exists in a mobile, vibrating architecture, which is why it's such a part of us and living things. They work as round things. And I think when you get into the sacred geometry, even at its most foundational place, Sandy, to talk to what you said, when the original egg or conceptus is formed, that nanosecond, one becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes eight. So on the third multiplication, it forms the egg of life pattern or the seed of life pattern that is considered to be the foundation of sacred geometry. So we are that living, we are incorporating it. We don't apply it, we reveal it, or it's revealed in us. It's in every part of us.
That's a nice distinction, Joanne. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the source for me of everything else. What can we do that makes sense of that? And one thing I offer you is we're taught that the cell divides from the moment of conception is cell division. And that's called the third division of the embryo. And I offer you the possibility that the language we're looking for, and we're all looking for it, we're all making it up and we're all looking for it. And the language that we're all looking for, not to own a name or a word or anything like that, simply to make sense of this through language to the degree that we can, is that rather than a language of our culture of divide and conquer, the divisions of the embryo so we can conquer the process of being human and understand movement, it's multiply and unite, because we are always whole and complete. So I offer you the possibility of considering that if our language changes to multiplication, we struggle because the infinite pi is an infinite or non-commensurate number, which drives us all nuts. but it is the math of every single round thing. Every circle that ever existed anywhere of any size is always, when you divide it by its own diameter, 3.142 and. It's an infinite number. It drives us nuts. So we use the Fibonacci sequence as the nearest we can get because it approximates pi and it gives us a pattern to link onto. But it's in constant flux, and that's the key to its livingness. And we have to move from there to a place where we accept the sacred and we accept that each one of us is a whole and complete and infinite, unlimited being. It's tricky.
Sandy, you unmuted. Do you have a comment or question before we move on to Annie?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to share a dear friend of mine who is a doctor of osteopathy and a professor. I remember him showing me the video that they took of conception, where it's the multiply and unify. And it
Yes,
was
right.
watching the sperm swimming around the egg all together. And then the chosen one gets to penetrate when that egg is in that rotational space where it can, yeah. And it's just like, yes, it's multiply, it's unify and multiply in that case. And I just thought that's just even from the beginning, that's just an exquisite visual. I mean, microscopic level, but still a visual of how we become who we are. So
And just
thank
that
you.
language
Thank you.
shift from division
Yes,
to multiplication,
absolutely.
or from penetrating to the egg, the ovum welcomes in one
welcomes and
sperm,
receives.
welcomes in, receives. Yeah. Paul, did you have
Isn't
a
that
comment?
fascinating?
Yeah, I think what a fascinating place to bring. What a fascinating place to bring us to, where we're trying to look at how we begin and then evolve and thrive, rather than learning anatomy from the dead in skeleton form. And I think it's a much more intelligent and smart place to stay and begin, because somebody said, don't throw the bathwater out with the baby. And quite the contrary, you should bloody definitely throw the bathwater out with the baby because it's dirty water. Put fresh water in. Let's have a fresh view. And let the baby grow and become an adolescent, an adult, and an elder. And it's important that we're prepared to evolve ourselves in the way we think and learn together. And then that way we'll all prosper. And then this is a very fruitful place to be and to grow from. And it's really important that we appreciate where we all came from, because we all had to begin somewhere. But it's no secret that the car definitely replaced the horse. And it was said it never would. And living tensegrity and understanding it properly and recognizing that fascia is the medium in which it is revealed to us, because now we understand what fascia is more comprehensively, rather than it being misdiagnosed as a connective structure, when if it's never disconnected, how can it connect anything? We are the ones that interrupt it. And if we redefine what we're talking about properly, when we have clarity, not confusion, instead of trying to take new science, but talk about it in an old out, inappropriate language that makes it more confusing, let's clear out, like we should all clear out our clutter, keep what's necessary, keep what's beneficial, but move forward together with a newer language, a fresher understanding, a more enthusiastic willingness to share, learn, and collaborate. I think we will serve the global audience much better.
Thank you, Paul. Listen, we only have about 10 more minutes. Annie Dillon, you have your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, so I guess first I'll introduce myself a little bit. I am a functional anatomy nerd. I also have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that grants a unique perspective. And I'm into somatic education, biomechanics, everything. I also deeply value fascia research and tensegrity. So I really love what Dr. Joanne was saying, because that's kind of where I sit. Is I sit in the fusion of all concepts and bridging them together rather than throwing out one concept for another. especially when I'm looking at the world through a hypermobile body. I have a hypermobile horse. And my problem with some of the tensegrity language is that if we are relying solely on the fascia system, what happens when our fascia is compromised through genetically weak collagen? And that's a really big gap that I'm finding in the biotensegrity conversations that's not being filled, that the biomechanic conversations do fill. And I feel like that's a really important nuance to kind of honor and respect, that we need both lenses to be able to answer these questions. And that's where I really love what Dr. Joanne was saying, is that it's symbiotic. You know, we shouldn't separate. We shouldn't throw away the old just because we have something new and shiny. You know, we have 200 years of biomechanics anatomy research. We can't just throw that out for something and replace it with something that doesn't really answer the questions by itself either. Does that make sense?
Brilliantly said, Annie. Can I jump in, Carol?
Sure.
I'll be quick as well. Annie, what you're saying is that we have to be very, very careful what we name and what we do under the name of that thing. And as somebody who has been part of the biotensegrity movement for many years, and I'm no longer part of what's called biotensegrity, I now have taken the research to another place where I work with applied tensegrity, or let's say applied movement. Let's call it that, because I don't think we apply tensegrity, we reveal it. And for me, the hypermobility, I am hypermobile. So I thought I was brilliant when I first did yoga because I could do it all and it was, yeah. But when I got fatigued and I discovered that this spectrum from fixed to flow, is what I call it, is that, and Paul has this wonderful name of the Goldilocks zone in the middle, how hard it was for me to find the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
Now, so far, the depth of our studies have been under the banner of biomechanics. So that's the depth of our expertise. The term biotensegrity was coined by Dr. Stephen Levin, and he's done some very brilliant research. Further research on tensegrity with, for example, Donald Ingber has been done at a cellular level, but these different branches haven't yet been put together. And what's happening is that the actual application of getting somebody who experiences hypermobility, who as a living being feeds back to themselves, this beautiful yoga sequence that I'm doing perfectly is fatiguing me. It's bringing me to pain because I'm already in a flow end of a spectrum. So I don't want to be doing more flowing, lengthening, stretching, God forbid the S word, at that
We
end
need
of the
more
spectrum.
stability and
I need
stabilize.
more. Well, you actually need more dynamic. You need to be able to recognize the dynamic instability that you have as something that you can animate and activate at will without a time delay, because fascia is the tissue of time in the body. It's the tissue of temporality. So to take it, it's like the next level. Very, very quickly, Carol, I know we want to go, but I had the privilege of working for many, many years with Tom Myers, and I saw the birth of anatomy trains. And it was a very brilliant clearing of a very dense forest. We went from the anatomy of bits to the anatomy of bands. And God love him, I did the first dissection in the lab with Tom Myers of the superficial front line. I'll never forget. He said, I'm going out for lunch, find the front line. And I was like, are you kidding me, Tom? Are you telling me that you worked it out intellectually before you did it on the body? And we found that some of that wasn't in the body. But he very brilliantly cleared a clearing in the forest. He's a very brave man. He's a very brilliant orator. And I worked alongside him. I lived in his house with him and his wife, and I knew them really well. And I so and still admire Tom for the energy it took to say, we're not made of bits, we're made of bands. And let me add, bands of fascia are not where it ends. We are bodies animated by beings in totally unique ways on a spectrum from fixed to flow. And you cannot treat two people the same way and get the same result. So what I'm asking you to do, Annie, is carry on expanding with us, carry on feeding back with us, carry on arguing with us, take what works for you from all the little bits, because that's what we're doing, and put it together with us in this way of honoring the tissue in all its variation. And I want to share something with you that I think is really important, because the language is essential. When Vaucanson designed a duck back in the 1800s, before there was electricity, in the 1700s actually, it was the 18th century, he designed a duck with 4,000 moving parts that appeared to quack, defecate, waddle, and eat. Appeared, 4,000 parts. I just want you to think about this. This young man was 29 years old. He designed something that appeared to, on its own, an automaton, appeared to move by itself, eat by itself, defecate by itself, and quack by itself. And
Joanne, I'm going to have to ask you to finish up pretty quickly.
I will do. And at that point, there was no, this is candlelight, he did this. And at that point, they changed the definition of nature. The word nature came to mean anything other than man-made. Now, I don't know about you, but I was man-made. Human made me. My mum's human, and so's my dad. I think it's the same for all of us. So we have to go really deep on how we change the language and what information we take with us.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, Paul, you get the last word, 2 minutes.
Well, what a privilege it's been to sit and share some time with you all. It's great to hear everybody's point of view and perspective. Annie, I personally would like to invite you to share some more of your story. I've had some success with hypermobility clients, and me and Joanne work together closely on this topic. If we can help you in any way, it would be my pleasure to give you some assistance if possible. You don't have to accept it, it's just an offer. But Dr. Kevin Hauser, thanks very much for letting us borrow your site. Carol, you're an awesome legend. Thanks for spending an hour with me and allowing me to talk at all. I really appreciate being one of the participants of this whole gathering.
Thank you, Deanna, as well, for the invitation. Thanks, Paul.
And I'm sorry if we didn't get to some of the questions that appeared in the chat and some of the comments too. It seems like people were really engaged in this conversation, and I thank you all very much for showing up and for being willing to be a part of this. You'll notice at the top of your screen, the meeting is being transcribed, and so there will be a transcription that you'll be able to read as well as the recording at a later date. Again, thank you, Deanna Drendel and Dr. Hausler, for all you've done to pull this together. And so let me just at 11:59 Eastern Time say best wishes to all of you, and let's just keep learning together and sharing together in the spirit of understanding how living systems, including horses and people, and trees and ducks, all work. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, everyone.